turn to this. This week has been nuts in terms of criminal investigations. Michael Cohen has basically, and we have some. We'll play some more audio clips of him a little bit later. He is sort of a interesting figure, to say the least. But what is also really interesting, I mean, this week feels, and I feel like we've said this before, but this week feels different in the sense that the structures around Donald Trump seem to be sort of like crumbling a little bit. And this clip that we have, and I want you to listen to it, it's long, but it really is fascinating. Judge Napolitano is on Fox and Friends, and that notion of of this structure sort of this is like sort of like he's explaining that on some level, but it's also we're witnessing it as they all are just sort of slack-jawed as he's basically telling them like, yeah, Donald Trump really did something wrong here. And here's the segment. I love it. They start with a graphic of the scales of justice, and Fox outweighs Friends on the scale of justice. Just so that, I never noticed that, but that's pretty funny. And I don't know who that face is. That is a weird graphic. Anyways, so listen to this. We'll stop it, and if you want to stop it, just tell us when to stop.
President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, sentenced to 3 years in prison for tax fraud, campaign finance violations, and lying to Congress.
Cohen ripping into his former boss, Donald Trump, claiming blind loyalty led him to a path of darkness to cover up Donald Trump's dirty deeds.
And he went on and on and on. Here to break it all down, Fox News senior judicial analyst.
He went on and on and on. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And he went on and on and on. Here to break it all down, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, Michael Cohen got off easy. 3 years, it's pretty good. He's got to be happy about that. What do we learn?
Well, nobody is happy about going to jail,
he knew what he was looking
but
at.
it's a lot less time than the government wanted and a lot less time than we all thought he would get. Look, I've sentenced over 1,000 people in my career, and I've heard things defendants say. Sentencing today is essentially a mathematical function. You're checking boxes. You're complying with guidelines. Obviously, there's some room for deviation, and Judge Pauly, the judge in this case, gave Michael Cohen a substantial benefit. It's interesting. Remember, he was prosecuted
Because of the cooperation?
Correct. He was prosecuted by two offices. He was prosecuted by the special counsel in D.C. They wanted him to get no jail time. And he was prosecuted by the U.S. attorneys here in New York. They wanted him to get 4 years. Judge Pauly gave him 3. But a very, very telling statement came out of the judge's mouth yesterday after he read all the documents and heard all the arguments from the government, prosecutors in D.C., prosecutors in New York, Michael Cohen and his lawyers. And that was about the president. The judge finding that the president ordered and paid for Michael Cohen to commit a crime. That is very telling.
What crime?
The intentional deception and failure to report campaign payments.
But Donald Trump has said that was not a campaign violation because it wasn't involving the campaign. It was a damage control payment.
Unfortunately, the president wasn't in the courtroom, and the people who were, the federal prosecutors who had a statement from David Pecker, the guy that owns the National Enquirer, said it was for the campaign. The prosecutor said it was for the campaign. Michael Cohen said it was for the campaign. The president wasn't there. Maybe he should have had lawyers there. So if you make an honest mistake in failing to report something, or if you take $100,000 and you're only supposed to take $2,500, you can correct that by returning the money, paying a fine, and correcting the report. If you do this as part of a scheme to hide it, then it's not a civil wrong, then it's a crime. That's what the judge found yesterday.
Well, if, like, for example, Reverend Wright is speaking out, making President Obama, candidate Obama, look bad, and someone walks up to Reverend Wright and says, hey, could you stop making the president, the senator look bad? He's running for president. But what does that have to do with the campaign? But yet it is that might influence how I vote.
Pause it 1 second. Did you hear that, Heather?
Jeez, what?
How desperate do you have to get at this point to bring up Reverend Wright?
Oh, my God.
And to equate going up a random person not associated with the campaign walking up to Reverend Wright and saying, "Hey, will you please be quiet?" And it's stunning to me. The next thing they're going to ask is they're going to demand that Barack Obama be properly vetted, and that Bill Ayers.
No doubt about it.
What about Bill
Lock
Ayers?
him up.
But here is the judge. I mean, this is pretty funny. This is sort of like it sort of feels like, I don't know, if you were to actually gather your children around and say, "Look, guys, there's no Santa Claus." But wait a second. What about who brought us the? Yeah, no, that was your uncle. He bought that. But wait, what about that time we heard the bells on the? Yeah, no, that was just that was our neighbor, and they were just playing around. Here we go. Continue.
Influence how I vote.
That would not be a campaign.
So this is no difference. This is a negative story the president went out because he's running for president.
I understand the president's argument. Unfortunately, the court and the prosecutors who work for the president disagree with him.
Yeah, but they went after John Edwards for essentially the same idea, because there was money paid to a woman who he had an affair with and had a child. That went to court, that went to trial, and he was found not guilty.
The John Edwards case actually hurts the president because John Edwards' lawyers made a motion to dismiss the indictment, saying it's not a crime. And the judge published an opinion saying why it's a crime. Now, the jury didn't believe the government and believed John Edwards. But the fact of the matter is, any scheme to defraud the government by failing to report what must be reported is a crime, unless it's an honest mistake, in which case it's not a scheme.
Does he have to serve all 3 years?
No, he'll have to serve 85%. But if the Criminal Justice Reform Act that the president wants, that Democrats want, that Republicans want, from Cory Booker to Rand Paul, passes, 1/3 of his time will be removed, and he'll be out in about a year and 9 months.
All right, Judge, thank you very much.
Pleasure,
Available
guys.
to practice law again.
No, I doubt he'll ever practice law again. Brian, some people say he never really practiced law.
I've heard that.
And he owes a lot.
Oh my gosh, that was really rough for the Fox and Friends. They. I feel like
poor
Judge
baby.
Exactly. I feel like Judge Napolitano not a friend anymore.
Yeah, I'm afraid not.
But I feel like that moment, like how many of those moments, look, these three guys, these three stooges on this couch are not that important, but there's like, metaphorically speaking, that conversation is probably happening in people's minds or, across the country on some level. I don't think a lot of these people are, in terms of voters or whatnot, are gonna walk away for Donald Trump for that. But I have a feeling like people who flax, like I'll be very surprised if Chris Christie takes his job. Although I could see him coming in at this point. Like if you come in at this stage, right, you probably won't have to do anything criminal. You'll just watch it all fall around.
Yeah. He may see himself as Alexander Haig, right? The guy who came in the latter part of the Nixon administration and kind of oversaw the end.
Right.
Maybe he sees himself as that. One thing I think is really important to point out about this what Napolitano said, and he kept saying this, but he didn't really explain it, that there was a scheme. I think people have been up until now under the impression that Trump and Cohen and Pecker, after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and then, Stormy shows up and Karen McDougal show up and they go, hey, we're going to go public because this was all part of a big, sort of churn of a lot of issues around women that were coming up towards the end of the campaign. And that Trump and Cohen and Pecker came up with this idea to pay them off, and to set up the shell companies and do all that stuff. Just to keep them quiet until the election. Now, that would be illegal anyway, what they did, and we've heard Trump on tape basically talking about it, so we know that it happened and we know Trump was involved. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But what has happened in the last week is that we found out that this scheme was hatched back in 2015. This wasn't something that they came up with at the last minute. Everything was a flurry. It was the end of the campaign. Nobody knew what they were doing. They were doing this stuff since 2015. We don't even know how many other situations like this came up. Donald Trump called, and this was reported in the Wall Street Journal a while back, and now it has been confirmed, that what Pecker told the prosecutors, and Cohen confirmed, and I think there's documentary evidence, plus, tapes and what have you, to back this up. Trump called Pecker in there in 2015. He's standing there with Michael Cohen up in Trump Tower and said, literally, this is the quote, "What can you do for my campaign?" It doesn't get any more explicitly campaign related than that. And they came up with this idea that what Pecker would do was try and head off at the pass any kind of these negative information, particularly about women. But it says in the document, the press release, that it was also, among other things, we don't even know what else was coming up, right? That may have been some of this Apprentice stuff that has, some's come out in recent days. Maybe it's drugs, maybe it's, who knows? I don't know. But, and maybe it's some of it's bogus too. There may have been people there looking for looking to make a quick buck by selling something to the Inquirer. But whatever, this thing was in place for, from the very beginning of the campaign. August of 2015, Trump came down the escalator in June of 2015. So this stuff was going on. This was a scheme. It was an illegal scheme where they were trying to protect Trump by, paying money to people who allegedly had negative information, and they weren't reporting it as campaign contributions. Right. That is illegal, and it's a scheme, as Napolitano says. It's not just something, well, gee, we were all, so busy, we didn't really know what we were doing. No one can say that. No one can say that somebody didn't have an obligation from 2015 on to go and ask Don McGahn, by the way, who was the campaign lawyer for Donald Trump from the very beginning, and who happened to be, an election law expert. He's one of the leading experts in the Republican Party on election law. So nobody can say that there wasn't anybody around, they didn't know who to turn to, they didn't have any way of doing it. So, I think this is very, very serious for him because, this is just one example of the kind of corrupt scheme that he was up to.
And I would imagine this is something that he's probably not going to have to worry about until the moment he steps out of the White House as not the president. And I think, someone's going to come up and shake his hand and then slap a cuff around him or something.
Well, maybe, one thing that we should, God help us if we get into another one of these, let's not look in the rearview mirror. We have to move forward and have enact our positive agenda. This is going to be a big
I find that
battle for a lot of us if they decide to do that. Oh, I wouldn't be surprised, I really wouldn't.
All right. So look, I want to, we're going to see, I think there's going to be a lot more of this. I think they're starting with low-hanging fruit and then working up and sort of laying out like sort of a certain pattern of criminality, and then are going to start getting a little bit deeper and stuff. But who knows? I'm not convinced that the Republican lawmakers are going to diminish their support for him. All right.